The name Al Capone does not elicit fear as it once did. However, for anyone who lived during his reign of terror, Al Capone's arrest and subsequent imprisonment was welcomed as good news. Nevertheless, not many are familiar with Al Capone's last 24 hours before his arrest, which were filled with nothing but drama. Well, these were Al Capone's last 24 hours before his arrest. Al Capone arrested. But before we get into Al Capone's final 24 hours before his arrest, it is important to understand what kind of man he was and what led him to his famous drama-filled arrest. Al Capone, the notorious gangster who would later become known as Scarface, was born in the bustling streets of New York City in 1899. He was the son of Italian immigrants, and from a young age it was clear that Capone was destined for a life of crime. Growing up in the tough neighborhoods of Brooklyn, Capone found himself drawn to the allure of the streets. He quickly became involved in small-time gangs, seeking a sense of belonging and power. It was during this time that he joined the infamous 5 Points Gang, a criminal organization that operated in the city. Under the guidance of his mentor, Frankie Yale, Capone learned the tricks of the trade and honed his skills as a young hoodlum. He proved to be a quick learner, displaying a natural talent for manipulation and violence. Capone's reputation began to grow, and he soon became a trusted associate within the gang. But Capone's ambitions extended beyond the confines of New York City. In 1919, he received an invitation that would change the course of his life. Johnny Torrio, the head of a powerful criminal syndicate, offered Capone the opportunity to join him in Chicago. Eager for new opportunities and hungry for power, Capone accepted the offer without hesitation. Upon arriving in Chicago, Capone wasted no time in making a name for himself. He quickly became involved in organized crime, working as a bouncer in a brothel owned by Torrio. It was here that he first caught the attention of his future mentor, who recognized Capone's potential and took him under his wing. Under Torrio's guidance, Capone's rise through the ranks of the criminal underworld was swift. He proved himself to be a loyal and ruthless enforcer, earning the trust and respect of his superiors. Capone soon became Torrio's right-hand man, a position that would solidify his place within the Chicago outfit. As Capone's influence grew, so did his criminal empire. He expanded the bootlegging business through violent means, eliminating rival gangs and establishing his dominance over the lucrative illegal alcohol trade. Capone's reputation for brutality and fearlessness spread throughout the city, earning him a fearsome reputation. But it wasn't just his criminal activities that set Capone apart. He also became known for his extravagant lifestyle, flaunting his ill-gotten wealth with expensive jewelry and lavish parties. Capone's flamboyant persona only added to his mystique, making him a larger-than-life figure in the eyes of the public. As the 1920s roared on, Capone's grip on Chicago tightened. His profitable relationships with Mayor William Hale Thompson and the corrupt Chicago Police Department ensured that he could operate with relative impunity. The city became his playground, and he reveled in his power and influence. However, Capone's reign as a crime boss would eventually come to an end. His involvement in the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre in 1929 would prove to be a turning point in his criminal career. The brutal murder of 7 members of the rival North Side Gang damaged Capone's public image and led to his designation as public enemy number 1. The Prohibition era had turned Chicago into a hotbed of criminal activity, and Capone wasted no time in making his mark. Capone's first major challenge came in the form of the North Side Gang, led by the notorious George "Bugs" Moran. The North Side Gang controlled a significant portion of the illegal alcohol trade in Chicago, and Capone saw them as a direct threat to his ambitions. The rivalry between Capone and Moran escalated into a violent conflict that would become legendary in the annals of organized crime. The two gangs engaged in a series of brutal turf wars, with each side vying for control over the lucrative bootlegging operations. Despite the public outrage and demands for justice, Capone managed to maintain his grip on power. He had cultivated profitable relationships with influential figures, including politicians and law enforcement. These alliances allowed him to operate with relative impunity, as he had the protection of those in high places. Capone's control over the illegal alcohol trade continued to expand, and he became the undisputed kingpin of the Chicago outfit. His empire stretched across the city, with speakeasies, breweries, and smuggling operations under his command. Capone's ruthlessness and cunning were unmatched, and he eliminated anyone who dared to challenge his authority. In 1926, Moran narrowly escaped an assassination attempt orchestrated by Capone's men. This event, known as the Hawthorne Inn shooting, further intensified the rivalry between the two gangs. The St. Valentine's Day massacre came next and was the culmination of a bitter rivalry between Capone's Chicago outfit and the North Side Gang, led by George "Bugs" Moran. The two gangs were vying for control over the lucrative bootlegging business in Chicago, and tensions had been escalating for some time. On that fateful day, 7 members of the North Side Gang were lured to a garage on North Clark Park Street under the false pretense of a lucrative bootlegging deal. Unbeknownst to them, Capone's men were lying in wait, armed with machine guns. As the unsuspecting members of the North Side gang entered the garage, they were met with a hail of bullets. The massacre was swift and brutal, leaving the victims dead or dying on the blood-stained floor. The violence was unprecedented, even in the world of organized crime. Moran escaped the violence, but just barely. He was late to the scene and missed the shootings by minutes. A few days later, he allegedly told reporters, "Only Capone kills like that." It was a line so famous that it made it into the St. Valentine's Day Massacre movie. On the day of the murders, witnesses said that they saw 4 men enter the garage. 2 of the men were dressed as police officers. The officers ordered Moran's gang to line up against the wall, where they were hit with a spray of machine gun and shotgun bullets. 70 rounds of ammo were fired. One of the victims, Frank Gusenberg, survived long enough to allegedly tell police, "No one shot me." The St. Valentine's Day Massacre sent shockwaves throughout Chicago and the nation. The sheer brutality of the act horrified the public and drew the attention of law enforcement agencies. It was a turning point in the public's perception of Capone and his criminal empire. The massacre damaged Capone's carefully cultivated public image as a modern-day Robin Hood. While some may have viewed him as a benevolent figure who provided for the less fortunate, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre revealed the true nature of his criminal activities. Capone's involvement in such a heinous act of violence shattered any illusions of nobility. The public outcry following the massacre led to Capone's designation as a danger to the public. The media sensationalized his criminal activities, painting him as a ruthless and dangerous gangster. Capone's name became synonymous with violence and lawlessness, further solidifying his notoriety. Despite the negative publicity and the damage to his public image, Capone's criminal empire continued to thrive. His profitable relationships with Mayor William Hale Thompson and the corrupt Chicago Police Department ensured that he could operate with relative impunity. The city's authorities turned a blind eye to his activities, allowing him to expand his bootlegging business and amass immense wealth. However, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre had far-reaching consequences. It drew the attention of federal authorities who were determined to bring Capone to justice. While it would take some time, their efforts would eventually lead to his downfall. The involvement of the feds was his ultimate undoing. After the feds became involved in his case, it was not long before the once untouchable gangster found himself in handcuffs. March 27, 1929, a day like any other for the notorious gangster. He was on top of the world. However, he had a court date. He had been ordered to appear and testify before a grand jury that was investigating violations of federal prohibition laws. Al Capone appeared before the grand jury. He knew that he had protection from powerful people, so he had nothing to be afraid of. However, the feared gangster did not know what awaited him outside the courtroom. You see, just 1 month earlier, on February 27th, Al Capone had been subpoenaed at his winter home near Miami, Florida, to appear as a witness before a federal grand jury in Chicago on March 12th for a case involving a violation of prohibition laws. Seeing that he felt untouchable, Al Capone had failed to appear before the grand jury. Seeing that he felt invincible, Al Capone gave the excuse that he had been bedridden with illness. Al Capone had reportedly had a severe case of bronchopneumonia for 6 weeks and was in no shape to travel. But was this the case? Was Al Capone really sick, or had he just committed a crime that would get him arrested? Well, since he had been indicted by a federal grand jury, the feds saw this as their opportunity to put pounce on him. The feds were asked by U.S. attorneys to find out whether Capone was really telling the truth. Federal agents went to Florida and quickly found that Capone's story didn't hold water. When he was supposedly bedridden, Capone was out and about, going to the racetracks, taking trips to the Bahamas, even being questioned by local prosecutors. And by all accounts, his health was just fine. After testifying in the Chicago courtroom, Al Capone walked out, unaware of what was about to come. Federal agents quickly pounced on him. Al Capone was confused. A day that was supposed to go on smoothly had turned on its head, and for the first time, he was in handcuffs. For the first time, it seemed, the authorities had been one step ahead of him. He thought he had the who's who on his side. However, it seemed that his intelligence had failed to catch wind of his impending arrest. Nevertheless, Al Capone was not at all fazed. He complied and was taken down to the station and charged with contempt of court for feigning illness to avoid an earlier appearance. He posted bond and was released the same day. Those were Al Capone's 24 hours before his arrest. What happened that day, as we will see, should have been a wake-up call to Al Capone. The world finally saw that Al Capone was not untouchable. His enemies also saw this. However, Al Capone did not see the significant meaning of his first ever arrest. Instead of laying low, he decided to do something audacious. There are conflicting theories about what happened next, but one is for sure. Al Capone's first arrest saw him come crumbling down in the months and years that followed. Less than 2 months later, on May 17th, Capone and his bodyguard, Frank Klein, were arrested in Philadelphia by local police as they left a movie theater. The two were taken in for carrying concealed weapons. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 1 year in jail. This is where the story gets crazy. crazy. At the Philadelphia's Eastern State Penitentiary, where he was to serve his time, he reportedly lived in luxury amid French furniture, plush rugs, and a Victrola radio in his cell. Rumors started to circulate that he had orchestrated his arrest. First, he hadn't been arrested by the feds, but by local cops. Remember, local cops had not been a threat to him as he had power and influence due to his relationship with Mayor William Hale Thompson and the corrupt Chicago Police Department. There was no way they would arrest him. Plus, why would he plead guilty when he had enough money to pay for good lawyers? It all seemed a bit too convenient. Maybe he wanted the public to see that he had spent time behind bars, thus had been punished and absolved of any past wrongdoings. Or maybe his arrest had emboldened his enemies and they were closing in on him. So he decided to lay low in prison as things cooled down. Whatever the case, Al Capone was released from jail a few months early for good behavior. Despite serving jail time, his legal woes were far from over. In April 1930, Capone was arrested on vagrancy charges when visiting Miami Beach. The governor had ordered sheriffs to run him out of the state. Capone claimed that Miami police had refused him food and water and threatened to arrest his family. He was charged with perjury for making these statements, but was acquitted after a 3-day trial in July. However, his luck would soon run out as the feds moved in to put him away for good. They had been quietly building a case against Al Capone, and in 1931, Capone found himself facing another charge. The charges against him were not for the violent crimes he had committed, but for something seemingly less glamorous: tax evasion. Al Capone imprisoned. Initially, Capone pleaded guilty to some of the charges, hoping to secure a more lenient sentence. However, he later rescinded his guilty pleas as the judge refused to honor the 2.5-year plea bargain. Capone's legal team fought tooth and nail to undermine the government's case, but their efforts would ultimately prove futile. Capone's lawyers, who had relied on the plea bargain, had mere hours to prepare for the trial and ran a weak defense focused on claiming that essentially all his income was lost to gambling. In a highly publicized trial, Capone faced a jury of his peers. The courtroom was packed with spectators, eager to witness the downfall of one of the most notorious gangsters of the era. The trial became a spectacle, with the media covering every twist and turn, further fueling the public's fascination with Capone. Despite his attempts to evade justice, Capone was ultimately convicted. Capone was convicted on 5 counts of income tax evasion on October 17, 1931, and was sentenced a week later to 11 years in federal prison, fined $50,000 plus $7,692 for court costs, and was held liable for $215,000 plus interest due on his back taxes. Capone's conviction sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld. It was a stark reminder that even the most powerful and feared gangster was not above the law. The government's successful prosecution of Capone served as a warning to other organized crime figures, signaling that they too could face the consequences of their actions. With Capone behind bars, the Chicago outfit was left without its charismatic leader. The criminal empire that he had built began to crumble. However, the organization did not disappear entirely. Capone's trusted underboss, Frank Nitti, took over as the new boss, attempting to maintain control and keep the outfit operational. Nitti, a cunning and ruthless individual, had been a loyal lieutenant to Capone for years. With his ascension to power, the outfit continued to operate, albeit at a lower level and with a different approach. Nitti was known for his more discreet and calculated methods, avoiding the open violence that had marked Capone's rule. Under Nitti's leadership, the Chicago outfit shifted its focus to other lucrative criminal activities. Prostitution, labor union racketeering, and gambling became the main sources of income for organized crime in the city. The outfit maintained its influence and control, albeit in a more covert manner. While Nitti managed to keep the organization afloat, the absence of Capone's larger-than-life presence was felt. Organized crime in the city had a lower profile once prohibition was repealed, already wary of attention after seeing Capone's notoriety bring him down, to the extent that there is a lack of consensus among writers about who was actually in control and who was a figurehead front boss. But in the late 1950s, FBI agents discovered an organization led by Capone's former lieutenants, reigning supreme over the Chicago underworld. After his conviction for income tax evasion in 1931, Al Capone was sent to the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta to serve his sentence. The once powerful crime boss now found himself confined within the prison walls, facing a new reality. Upon his arrival at Atlanta, Capone was officially diagnosed with syphilis and gonorrhea. He was also experiencing withdrawal symptoms from cocaine addiction, the use of which had perforated his nasal septum. Capone was competent at his prison job of stitching soles on shoes for 8 hours a day, but his letters were barely coherent. He was seen as a weak personality, and so out of his depth dealing with bullying at the hands of fellow inmates that his cellmate, seasoned convict Red Rudensky, feared that Capone would have a breakdown. Rudensky was formerly a small-time criminal associated with the Capone gang and found himself becoming a protector for Capone. The conspicuous protection by Rudensky and other prisoners drew accusations from less friendly inmates and fueled suspicion suspicion that Capone was receiving special treatment. However, this was not the case. Unlike his first imprisonment at the Philadelphia's Eastern State Penitentiary, where he reportedly lived in luxury amid French furniture, plush rugs, and a Victrola radio in his cell, at his new prison, he was treated like any other inmate. No solid evidence ever emerged, but it formed part of the rationale for moving Capone to the recently opened Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary off the coast of San Francisco. Capone's time in prison was far from easy. He was assigned to a cell in the hospital section due to his deteriorating health. The effects of neurosyphilis, a disease he had contracted years earlier, were taking a toll on his body and mind. Neurosyphilis is a severe form of syphilis that affects the central nervous system. Capone's condition caused a range of symptoms, including memory loss, confusion, and difficulty with motor skills. It was a stark reminder of the consequences of his reckless lifestyle. Despite his declining health, Capone still commanded a certain level of influence within the prison. He had a group of loyal followers who carried out his orders and protected him from other inmates. Capone's reputation as a feared and respected gangster followed him even behind bars. During his time in prison, Capone also faced withdrawal symptoms from his cocaine addiction. The drug had been a constant presence in his life, fueling his energy and aggression. Now, without access to it, he experienced the physical and psychological effects of withdrawal. In 1934, Capone was transferred to the newly opened Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. The move was seen as a way to further isolate him from the outside world and prevent any attempts to escape. Capone's arrival at Alcatraz made headlines, as the public was fascinated by the notorious gangster's new home. Life in Alcatraz was harsh and unforgiving. Capone was subjected to strict rules and regulations, and the prison's reputation for being escape-proof loomed over him. However, his declining health and deteriorating mental faculties made him less of a threat to the prison authorities. In fact, due to his good behavior, Capone was permitted to play banjo in the Alcatraz prison band, the Rock Islanders, which gave regular Sunday concerts for other inmates. Capone also transcribed the song Madonna Mia, creating his own arrangement as a tribute to his wife May. In 1936, Capone's time in Alcatraz took a violent turn. He was attacked by a fellow inmate, James Lucas, in the prison's shower room. Lucas, who was serving a sentence for drug trafficking, stabbed Capone multiple times with a makeshift knife. The attack left Capone with scars and further damaged his already fragile health. As Capone's mental faculties continued to deteriorate, he was transferred to the hospital section of Alcatraz. There, he received constant medical care as his condition worsened. The once powerful crime boss was now a shadow of his former self, battling the effects of neurosyphilis. He spent the last year of his Alcatraz sentence in the hospital section, confused and disoriented. Capone completed his term in Alcatraz on January 6, 1939, and was transferred to the Federal Correctional Institution at Terminal Island in California to serve out his sentence for contempt of court. He was paroled on November 16, 1939, after his wife May appealed to the court, based on his reduced mental capabilities. In 1939, after serving nearly 8 years of his sentence, Capone was released from prison on parole. His declining health and the pleas of his family played a significant role in the decision to grant him early release. Capone's time behind bars had taken a toll on his body, and it was clear that he was no longer the powerful figure he once was. Upon his release, he was referred to the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore for the treatment of syphilitic paresis. Because of his unsavory reputation, Johns Hopkins refused to treat him, but the city's Union Memorial Hospital was willing to take him as a patient. Capone was grateful for the compassionate care that he received and donated 2 Japanese weeping cherry trees to Union Memorial Hospital in 1939. After a few weeks of inpatient and outpatient care, on March 20, 1940, a very sickly Capone left Baltimore and traveled to his mansion in Palm Island, Florida. In 1942, after mass production of penicillin was started in the United States, Capone was one of the first American patients treated by the new drug. Though it was too late for him to reverse the damage to his brain, it did slow down the progression of the disease. In 1946, his physician and a Baltimore psychiatrist examined him and concluded that Capone had the mentality of a 12-year-old child. He spent the last years of his life at his Palm Island mansion, spending time with his wife and grandchildren. He spent his remaining years at his mansion, known as Capone's Hideaway, where he lived a quiet and secluded life. In 1947, Capone suffered a stroke at his Florida home. The stroke left him in a weakened state. However, he regained consciousness and started to improve, but contracted bronchopneumonia. He suffered a cardiac arrest on January 22nd, and on January 25th, surrounded by his family in his home, died after his heart failed as a result of apoplexy. His body was transported back to Chicago a week later, and a private funeral was held. He was originally buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Chicago. In 1950, Capone's remains, along with those of his father, Gabriele, and brother Frank, were moved to Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. The once feared gangster was now a mere memory. His reign of crime and and corruption coming to an end. Al Capone's time in prison and his subsequent decline in health marked the end of an era in American organized crime. His conviction for tax evasion and the downfall of the Chicago outfit had a lasting impact on the criminal underworld. Despite his criminal activities, Capone's life continues to captivate the public's imagination. His story has been the subject of numerous books, articles, and films, solidifying his place as one of America's most notorious gangsters. Today, Capone's name is synonymous with the dark side of the American dream. He represents a bygone era of organized crime, where power, money, and violence reigned supreme. Particularly from 1925 to 1929, shortly after he moved to Chicago, he enjoyed his status as the most notorious mobster in the country. He cultivated a certain image of himself in the media that made him a subject of fascination. His story serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us of the consequences of unchecked ambition and the allure of a life of crime. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.